Okay, done.
Okay, good. Welcome, everyone. This is, I believe, our fourth class in getting to know your mind. So let's go ahead and start with um, the prayers as usual, and I'll just lead those tonight. You can take the night off, Jana. So, all right, let's do the praise to Shakyamuni Buddha three times. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. And then let's do the short mandala offering. Let's just do this in English tonight. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, four continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. And then refuge, first time in English, twice in Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi daki chunyen gipe sonam gi dola penchir sangye drupar shok Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi Daki chunyen gipe sanam gi drola penchir sangye drupar shok. Okay, let's do a short meditation to have a chance to settle our minds a bit and then also to set our motivation together.
Together.
Okay.
Okay.
Right. So let's go ahead and begin with just a few minutes of focusing on the breath. And no doubt you have a technique you already use for that. So please just defer to that. And we'll spend a few minutes in silence just doing that. And then I'll come in and I'll lead you in, yeah, a short meditation so we can set our motivation together. So we can begin now. So, one of the topics we discussed last week was what are called these five object ascertaining mental factors, which is really, again, just those factors of our mind that cause us to become more engaged in a particular object. So, we're going to just think about them in relation to the motivation of bodhicitta. We're all familiar with this mind that has this wish, this desire to benefit all sentient beings. And then the accompanying desire to become a Buddha so we can do that. So, as you bring that to mind, think about, first of all, the factor of aspiration. Aspiration is the desire to engage in that object with kind of a wish to accomplish it. So, this is already there, certainly. Bodhicitta is an aspiration. It's our own minds looking at the goal of developing our minds completely into the state of Buddhahood to benefit all beings. So, without a doubt, this is there. Secondly, the factor of belief, a kind of conviction. And through our own study and investigation of the Buddha's path, we do have some level of belief in this as a worthy goal, a goal that we can accomplish, a goal that will be a benefit. So, in light of this, we can see a factor of belief that causes us to continue to engage in this mind and strengthen it on the basis of that conviction. And we also have a factor of mindfulness, which relates to an object that we have become familiar with, which again, because of our past study and meditation, we're quite familiar with the mind that aspires to become a Buddha for others. We want to maintain that non-forgetfulness with regard to it as we meditate on it now, as well as throughout this evening and throughout this life, to let that be a mind that we continually have at the forefront of our thoughts, our behavior. And then we have the factor of concentration, stabilization, which again is the ability to remain single-pointedly focused on this mind. This is what increases its power, its strength. This is what helps us to deepen our bodhicitta motivation, is by focusing single-pointedly on it. And that lends itself to the creation of wisdom, this fifth mental factor that we can see is also accompanying our mind of bodhicitta, the way in which we have developed our own insight into the path that leads to this goal, all the teachings that support our development of bodhicitta. Again, finding the wisdom of the conventional mind of bodhicitta that is so necessary for us to be able to accomplish our goal. So we have a factor of all five of these: the aspiration, belief, mindfulness, concentration, wisdom. And so just for a minute or so, remain focused on that mind, that aspiration, that wish to become a Buddha for the benefit of all beings. Try to deepen it and strengthen it in your own heart. And you can open your eyes fully, and we'll begin. Okay, so again, what we're working with in this course, as you know, are kind of getting to know the various factors of our minds. We call these the mental factors. We already have kind of divided mind in a sense when we think about it into the five sense consciousnesses and the mental consciousness that are the main minds in which all of these are operating. And then we have the 51 mental factors, and I'll just put those on the screen again, just to remind us of sort of where we're at and what we're exploring in this. This is the chart that has all of those on it. When the first class, towards the end of the first class and into the second class, we went through these five ever-present mental factors. These are there in every moment of mind, giving kind of they're sort of the engine of the mind, the mechanics, if you will. And then we went through these five focusing or object ascertaining mental factors that I just reviewed for you in the meditation tonight, thinking about them in the context of bodhicitta. And then the 11 virtuous mental factors we will be touching on, but I want to point this out already because we did begin our exploration of the first of the six root afflictions. And again, these six root afflictions are called that because they are kind of at the root of all of our problems. The first three in particular are often identified as those that play an even more central role. These are referred to as the three poisons or sometimes three roots. But the idea is that we're going to see that all of these secondary afflictions arise on the basis of those first three. So the way I'm going to be exploring each of these, because these are the main part of this text, in this study in this course, we really want to know these kind of crazy roommates, the roommates in our mind that are not so healthy to follow and go out with. So that's the idea behind these. When we look at attachment, we're going to continue looking at that a little bit tonight, the very first of these. We will also take a look at its opposite, the virtuous mental factor called non-attachment, the absence of attachment, and even more, a mind that is abiding in a peaceful state because we are not attached to all of these pleasant objects that we are normally drawn to in an unhealthy way. And then we're also going to take a look. You'll notice that there is a list after the six root afflictions of the 20 close afflictions, sometimes called secondary afflictions. And these are divided into various categories. So we see that there are first five that come from anger. The three we're going to look at later tonight are those that are derived from attachment. And then finally from confusion or ignorance. So we essentially have those three roots. And after the first 14 that are specifically from one of those three poisons, then we go on to those that are derived from both. So we'll take a look at those as well, or from some combination, both attachment and confusion, or the final category, those from all three mental poisons. So I just want to point that out. So because it's going to be a little jumping around tonight in terms of trying to kind of work with the different sections on this. So again, what we looked at last week was we began our exploration of attachment. And attachment, I think I pointed this out last week. In the very first teaching that the Buddha gave, the teaching on the Four Noble Truths, he was going through, which we did in this course as well in the very beginning, the truth of dukkha, the situation we're in of being completely unsatisfied. We can never really find true satisfaction, always in a state of some dissatisfaction. Secondly, the cause of that, the origin of that. And then thirdly, the cessation, the end of all of that. And then finally, the causes that lead to that, the path that we can follow. Well, in the second one, when he talked about the truth of dukkha, in terms of the origin of dukkha, he went on to essentially pinpoint craving, grasping, attachment as being the main cause, because that is our default mode. We are in the desire realm and we are constantly looking for something to bring us happiness through the various objects that we can experience through our five senses or that we can even think about. We can recall memories of times past when we're, oh, when I was young and went here and went there and did this and that. And we get very attached to those ideas that are bringing us a pleasurable sensation, but we put so much more on them. Again, there's an exaggerated quality to attachment, as there is to all of the afflictions. They are not seeing things clearly. They're not seeing things clearly in terms of even the conventional appearance of what things are because they're overlaying more pleasantness than what is actually there. But they're also, of course, in error at the very deepest level by thinking that there is even an inherently existent object. And we're going to explore this when we get to the antidote to the root of ignorance, the ignorance that is driving the whole show, that's at the roots of the tree of samsara, as we saw in that diagram. That requires us to kind of undermine this belief that things have their own identity. They have a way of establishing themselves. Maybe it's better to say established by way of their own identity. Things do have a nature. We can point to a tree and say it has a very different nature than a pond of water, right? They have different natures and can be identified distinctly. But nonetheless, they don't exist by way of their own identity. They don't establish themselves. I'm going to get into that deeper and deeper as we move through this course. But the fundamental error we're making right at the beginning with attachment and then also with anger and all of those that are derived from those is that we're overlaying this pleasantness, some degree of a quality on top of what we are experiencing. There's no denying that you're experiencing a pleasant sensation when you eat a delicious meal or have a wonderful dessert or whatever. Those experiences are undeniable. That pleasant sensation is occurring. Remember, that's our factor of feeling that is happening because we've come into contact with something that induces that feeling for us. But what attachment does is overlay a pleasantness that is up over and above what is there. Kind of makes it into something huge. We're going to examine this a little bit more tonight. So, what I thought we'd do to get things started for tonight is go ahead and look at our text, the book that we've been using, The World and Ourselves, and see how Venerable Gyatso just talks about attachment. All right. So that's this first paragraph. I believe it's on page 99 of if you go down to the bottom of that page, it's 99. If it's in the PDF file, it's 100 because I think the title page, the cover of the book is counted as one page anyway, just to point that out. But I think all the page references I have in the slides are to the actual PDF, uh, like what's at the bottom of each of the pages. Okay, so this is how he describes it. Attachment is a mental factor that sees a contaminated object as attractive and wishes to acquire it. So again, this is important to point out. It's a contaminated object, which, as he says here, are things that have arisen from contaminated karma and mental afflictions. In other words, everything in our world, everything we experience is arising through the force of our contaminated karma, and we are seeing that object as attractive and we wish to acquire it. And we are, again, moreover, involved in a process of exaggerating the pleasantness, the attractiveness of that object. Continuing, he says, although attachment observes its object correctly, as you know, the delicious or the cake that has a delicious flavor to it that is causing us to have some pleasurable experience, some pleasurable feeling, it is a mistaken consciousness because it apprehends the object incorrectly. Improper attention, which we're going to talk about in a short while, this is one of the factors that contributes to the arising of these delusions, these afflictions. Improper attention, meaning incorrect thinking, exaggerates the good qualities of the object or projects non-existent good qualities, let me move it over just a little bit, onto the object, and attachment holds these exaggerated and superimposed qualities to truly exist on the side of the object. So it's pointing out there the two things I just mentioned. At a conventional level, it is either exaggerating the good qualities that are experienced by you when you have contact with that object, or projecting non-existent good qualities onto it that aren't there. And that can happen at times. It maybe doesn't happen quite as often, but and then moreover, it's holding those qualities to truly exist on the side of the object. I pointed this out many times before whenever I teach on this idea. And I usually use music as an example because of my own attachment to music. But we all have music that we enjoy, right? A particular type of music, or maybe several types of music. I've never met anybody who likes all types of music. That would be pretty wild, wouldn't it? I mean, I don't know. It's just hard to imagine that you could embrace everything as something that you would enjoy. But maybe some people do have that experience. So the idea is that if you have your particular type of music that you enjoy, that induces a pleasurable feeling for you. And you believe at that moment that it is inherently in the object. When those notes are played and you hear that resonating in your eardrum, you are experiencing something you believe is pleasant from its own side. It has that pleasantness to you, so you make the assumption that everybody would think it's pleasant. How could anybody not like this music? It's the most wonderful music, right? We have those sorts of thoughts. Well, then we might invite a friend over and say, "Oh, I found this piece of music that is just really so wonderful. I enjoy it so much. I'm sure you'll love it." And you put it on for them, and they kind of go, "It's not really my style of music. I don't really care for it that much." Maybe they think it's neutral, but they might even think it's awful. They might say, take that off. That's horrible music. What are you doing?" Well, that right there proves that there's nothing inherently pleasant in the object. The object induces a pleasant feeling on the basis of our own karma. Our karma has caused us to have a particular relationship with various objects in our world, including people and what have you, and we see them through a lens of that karmic filter, allowing us to have that pleasant experience of certain objects and an unpleasant experience of others. And someone else can have those totally switched, right? You know, I, in regard to music, this often happens in my neighborhood where, suddenly you'll see a car parked out, and especially in the summertime when maybe you got windows open or something and you hear the boom, 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 boom of a music that they're playing, and that's not my style of music. And I'm like going, God, how can they listen to that horrible music? But for the person in the car who's listening to it, they're not torturing themselves by listening to music they don't like. They're listening to music that they actually really enjoy. So there's nothing, again, that makes it an unpleasant sound for me, in the same way there's nothing that makes what I like a pleasant sound for me. It's not existing from the side of the object. It is a karmic creation that causes us to have the experience of this is tasty, this is nice to listen to, this is, wonderful to enjoy. And that's the karma we have with those objects. And even that can change over time. I mean, go back to the music you listened to when you were like 10 years old, 12 years old. You wouldn't probably find it so enjoyable now. I mean, I remember getting lots of those little 45 singles of various bands that I'm sure I would never want to listen to again. So, so the idea is that these are mistaken ideas that we have. We call this improper attention or, again, incorrect thinking. Remember how I pointed out earlier on in this course that our sense consciousnesses are just bringing in that raw data, and it's our mental consciousness through our conceptual mind that is working with all of that in generally unhealthy ways, because it's sort of taking a snapshot of what that is, an idea of what it is, which is not always correct, and it's wanting to experience that and continue to, kind of enjoy that with this overlay of these things being so wonderful, so delightful. And attachment is the mind that is grasping at all of that and not wanting to be separated from it. So I think we all can see how attachment plays a role in our lives. We just don't always see it as a fault, as a problem. This is like the roommate that always thinks that they're acting in your best interest, right? The roommate that thinks, "Oh, you'll have a great time. It'll be wonderful. You'll enjoy it." And and this is not necessarily, I mean, I'm not saying you don't enjoy these things. You do enjoy them. That's the problem. You enjoy them and then you overlay all this stuff on top of them. So this is what we have to become aware of when we're working with attachment and why it's one of the first, in this case, the very first one that we're going to be working with in this course in terms of unhealthy states of mind that we really want to get to know. When those patterns are arising, when we start thinking about things in an unhealthy way, a way that we know is going to take us down the same route that we've been down a zillion times before and has never really brought us the satisfaction that we seek. So this is, again, we're going to be examining that as part of this, the faults of attachment and so on. Let me go back to Venerable Gyatso's wonderful text on this. Continue on, he says here, attachment is a non-aversion to existence in the mundane cycle of death and rebirth, again, what we call samsara, cyclic existence. It exaggerates the attractiveness of the object, wishes to not separate from it, wants happiness, and results in suffering by disturbing the mind. We don't realize how agitated our minds are when we're following objects of desire. We think it's a good thing, right? Because we're after what induces pleasure. But it's really a mind of a junkie, essentially, just brought down to maybe a much subtler level than what the mind of someone who is addicted to heroin or something might feel. But essentially, it's the same continuum. We have it at a subtler level, but it is disturbing to our minds. Love and compassion, on the other hand, are not selfish and do not exaggerate. Remember how I pointed out how, I think I did this in this course, how love has the ability to overcome hatred because it's rooted in reality. It's simply looking at beings and wanting them to be happy, to have the state of happiness that they are not experiencing. Compassion is looking at them and wanting them to be free from suffering, which is a state they are not experiencing. It's essentially grounded in truth. They're concerned for the welfare of others, and they increase one's sense of well-being. Seeking virtue, even, such as the desire to attain nirvana or enlightenment, Buddhahood, that's also not attachment if it renders the mind peaceful. And it generally does, when we cultivate the mind of renunciation and the wish to attain liberation, bodhicitta, these minds should be, again, not making the mind disturbed. They rather bring peace to the mind. And it continues saying, attachment seeks the pleasure of all three realms of existence. The three realms of existence are the desire realm that I mentioned frequently, because that's where we are, and most of the beings are in the desire realm. There's also what are called the form and the formless realms. And I won't talk about them maybe so much here, but they are states that are more reified in a sense, they're what's the right word for it? Not even reified. They're unique experiences that are based on having attained levels of concentration and deep states of mental stabilization that cause you to have a particular type of experience. But anyway, it just means that any realm of existence, you can have attachment to it. You can seek the pleasures of whatever it is that you experience in those realms of existence. Continuing, it says, other afflictions are easy to abandon, like washing dirt from a cloth, but attachment is difficult because it believes its projections to be true and cannot bear to be separated from the object. Or it pines for objects not possessed, right? It's that attachment that is seeking something that we are missing, something that we need, something that we have to have. It's like oil on cloth, difficult to separate from the mind. So it's just pointing out many of the features of attachment that make it kind of hard to work with. This is why it is good to start with this one and really see how can we begin to get familiar with that mind when it begins to arise, starts to come into our sphere of influence, and then try to interrupt it at points. And we're going to talk about the antidotes to attachment. How do we curtail it from going to these extremes? Again, we probably, hopefully, aren't junkies in the more, literal sense of the word, having, substance addictions and what have you that are very hard to manage because of the addictive process. But we are all addicts to some degree. I've used that phrase before that Venerable Rabina often uses, that we're all junkies born into a world of junk. All of this stuff is enticing to us. It's constantly pulling us out, constantly distracting us. And then we seek to attain it, to not be separated from it. We even seek things that we have not yet experienced. Oh, there's that. That's something new. I'll look forward to getting that. And we keep generating more and more attachment. And we think once more that we're acting in our best interest, but we're only creating our suffering. We're only creating a pattern that is never going to lead to true satisfaction. Another analogy for the way that attachment works is in regard to the suffering that it induces is this idea of honey on a razor blade, right? It's a really horrid image, right? But if it's something sweet and delightful and you go to lick it and of course you get cut in the process, it doesn't really do the trick. If anything that you could experience through this process that we've talked about of the senses or even thinking about something that you have as an object of pleasure for you, if it would induce a state of pleasure that is reliable, unchanging, that you could have for eternity, then it would work. But it's always transitory and it generally does not lead to any lasting satisfaction, as we've talked about when we talked about the nature of dukkha. The second level of dukkha, remember, is those pleasant experiences that are subject to change. What we call the dukkha or suffering of change. It is what we experience in the moment as pleasure, but if we were to pursue it at a kind of continual rate, continuing to have that more and more and more and more, it would only lead to pain. It'd be like us when we're kids going to a birthday party and eating cupcake after cupcake, thinking we're going to get happier and happier, and all we get is a, upset stomach and maybe even throw up or something because we haven't tended to our bodies well, right? That's the nature of those objects. They do not lead to lasting peace and happiness. So again, we'll move through the rest of what Venerable Gyatso says. I don't want to spend too much on it, but it's really an important one to understand and to get to know, because without getting to know it, we're going to be continually under its control. Then Venerable Gyatso, another passage that I've highlighted, let's make no mistake, he says, pleasure and happiness are not attachment, right? What we are experiencing is simply a feeling. Remember in those first five, the omnipresent, ever-present mental factors, it's simply a feeling tone that we experience. Pleasure or happiness, we can give it those labels. It's something that induces that, right? Though they are not attachment, but in our innate confusion about reality, we cannot experience pleasure without becoming attached. Attachment clings to all objects of pleasure, and especially to those we claim or desire as close friends or sexual partners, right? There's this, certainly around sexuality, there's a strong level of attachment. It's one of the most difficult ones to work with in terms of separating out the feeling of pleasure from the attachment that comes with it. Attachment is kind of always along for the ride. Anytime we experience something pleasant, it's always there to act again against our best interest, as opposed to us being able to somehow separate out just the pleasurable feeling and experience it without the attachment. Venerable Angie did the course on Tantra for all of you earlier this year. And this is one of the principles of Tantra, is that in Tantra there is a strong energy behind pleasure and the kind of movement towards pleasure, the energy that we have, that we create around that. That can be harnessed and used in a spiritual path. But the attachment is what it's meant to overcome. The attachment itself is not the goal of any type of practice in Buddhism. Attachment is the enemy, it is what is to be abandoned. So the pleasurable sensations do need to be experienced in a much more kind of purer way. Lama Yeshe, according to Venerable Rabina, Lama Yeshe used to say, the more pleasure, the better, dear. Like the more pleasure, it's not a problem to have more pleasure in your life. The problem is attachment. The problem is when you relate to that pleasure in an unhealthy way. So maybe I'll share a little passage from Lama Yeshe where he talks about this process. This is from Wisdom Energy, a wonderful book by Lama Zopa and Lama Yeshe, some of their teachings. He says, you have a boyfriend, for example, with whom you are obsessed. You find his every movement and gesture interesting. The way he walks, what he says, what he does, it all seems good to you. Even when he does something incredibly bad, for you it becomes a source of pleasure. You are concentrating so much on his attractive qualities that his negative aspects are totally obscured. The mind works in such a way, however, that if one day he says something particularly unpleasant to you, your attitude begins to change. You think, oh, he's not nice at all. Your mind concentrates on this thought, not nice, not nice, not nice. Soon, everything about him appears repulsive. There is nothing about him anymore that is pleasing to you. You can see this happen, can't you? It is incredible how the deluded mind works. First, something appears completely positive, and then it changes to its opposite. But I say that it is totally impossible for any object, any sentient being, to be completely positive or completely negative. Everything has both positive and negative energy. It is only the obsessed mind that sees things in terms of black and white. So this is kind of what's going on again, is that there's this distortion. We have these pleasant feelings that we get around people, particularly if we're attracted to them or what have you. And this is what we call being in love, right? Being in love is actually attachment. I hate to tell you, love in itself as a pure emotion might be there at some level, which is the concern for the welfare of the other, the happiness of the other. But most of what happens when we meet somebody who is very delightful to us and we paint them in that pleasant color where everything we see about them is wonderful, that's absolutely attachment. It's putting them on a pedestal that they can't possibly live up to because, as Lama Yeshe points out, they have both qualities. They have negative qualities, they have positive qualities. Every one of us is that way. You know, so when we begin to see them, we put them on this pedestal through the mind of attachment, totally, starry-eyed over them and everything. And then we start seeing the warts. We start seeing the unpleasant qualities. And they start lowering, we're lowering the pedestal quite a bit till it gets to the point where it's on the ground. There's somebody that, at this point, there's somebody who we don't even want anything to do with because we've gone from an entire projection of everything being good to an entire projection of everything being negative and bad. This is, again, a discrimination that we're making through our thought process that is not grounded in reality because every being has both aspects to them. You know? So this is, again, just, as I said, I hope I'm not belaboring the talk on attachment so much, but I really do feel like it's important for us to have a really deep understanding of what this mind is all about. I'm going to go into this in a moment. We have these different factors that play a role. There's called this the six factors for the arising of the disturbing emotions, but I'm going to again come back to that in a moment. I want to finish off a little bit about what is here. It says attachment. I think this is, let me see if I can go up just a little bit. I just want to make sure that I'm in the right section here. Ah, I didn't. Oh, that's the inappropriate thinking. Let's come back to that. Okay. Ah, then that's it. Okay, that's all I needed to share on that. I don't want to use Venerable Gyatso's presentation of these six just because it is a little bit wordier, and I also would like to just, I don't know, say things in my own language for this. The essence of these afflictions is that they're always arising in general with at least three of these six factors. And I'll point them out. They're going to be the first three we're going to talk about. They are definitely always there anytime an affliction arises. The other three that are part of the six can play a role, though their role is perhaps not as determined. So essentially these cause the delusions to be stimulated in us. These are the things that are behind the mechanism of our minds that are allowing the delusions to arise. And the most important one is the one that we touched on already, improper mental attention, improper thinking. So let me go to my slides. I haven't shared any of those yet, and I'll do this now. So again, these is just the introduction to the topic that we're talking about, attachment. Here are the six factors that give rise to the afflictions. The first three, the very first one is called the basis. And I put there, that is the seeds or karmic imprints of the afflictions. So essentially what this is that every one of us has had countless moments of delusions in our lives since beginningless time. If our minds have no beginning, those delusions have always been there. They continually arise, and they plant a seed for the delusion to arise again. Until you uproot the seeds, which is the deeper work of realizing emptiness and all the things we're going to touch on later in this course, until you do that work, you're always going to have the propensity for these delusions to arise. And even if you become very patient in this life and you're able to tolerate all kinds of things going on around you, you still have the seeds of anger. Even if you become very detached, non-attached to everything that's delightful and delicious and wonderful, you still have the seeds of attachment. You have to do deeper work to get rid of those. This just means that you have that propensity for that to come into your mind and to take you on a little ride, the ride of attachment, the ride of anger. So this is a factor that we are all dealing with, is that we have the seeds, these karmic imprints of the afflictions. Remember that one of the karmic results we have from something is the propensity to do it again. So any action we engage in mentally, physically, verbally, we are planting the seed for it to arise in our minds and in our behavior again. The second one is the object appearing to our mind. This is just pointing out the fact that objects do play a role. Objects don't have the ability to induce the affliction all by themselves because, of course, they need the seed on our minds, but moreover, they need the next factor, the third factor, which is us looking at them incorrectly. When we have objects that induce pleasure in us, in the case of attachment, the tendency is for as soon as that comes into our field of experience, to immediately start the third factor, which is this inappropriate attention, improper attention to the object. We begin thinking about it in ways that are not healthy. But the object is playing a role because certain objects, such as the music that we like versus the music that we don't like, that someone else might find really enjoyable but we despise, the pleasant music for us is an object that will potentially induce attachment, depending upon what we do with our minds. I really found when I first came across these six factors, I was really quite drawn to the explanation because these first three in particular are spelling out really what's happening every time we have a delusion arising. There's the seed of it on our minds. We come into contact with an object that is going to be inducing that particular emotion, that particular affliction. And the third factor, let me put that on the screen. We think about the object incorrectly. We do what I was talking about earlier tonight. We have incorrect mental attention or improper mental attention. We overlay on top of the object a pleasantness that is far beyond what is actually there. Because no matter what object we're talking about in terms of an experience within samsara of these contaminated objects, there still are people who are going to have a very different karma around that. That means that, again, the pleasantness is not even inherent in the object, much less the identity of the object. But we are taking what we experience based on our karma as a pleasant sensation, and we are overlaying all kinds of stuff on top of it, sometimes to a greater degree than others. That's when we have greater attachment, right? It's kind of interesting. In attachment, we don't talk about, we do use words like craving and grasping sometimes, or even desire. But the idea is there are different levels of attachment. You can have just like a little pull in that direction and some exaggeration, all the way to things that are totally distorted, totally out of touch with reality. And that again might call that something like crave or like grasping rather than craving or desire or attachment. But the idea is that we have gradations of this that we are involved in relation to various objects in our sphere of experience, right? Okay. So these three are essential. You have the seed for that attachment to arise. You come into contact with an object that induces a pleasurable sensation or that you believe will induce a pleasurable sensation, such as you go to the bakery and there's a nice little new dessert that they have or something, and it's there on the counter and you have never tried it. The clerk says, "Oh yeah, this is our new lemon cake or whatever. It's really yummy." And you start thinking about it. You're already getting attachment to it. You haven't even tasted it yet, and you can't wait to get it on the plate, get your fork, get to your seat, and start shoveling it in your mouth, right? So again, attachment is the that pleasurable object coming into our sphere of influence to some degree, and we exaggerate. We don't, and we moreover don't want to be separated from it. We think we need that object. We have to have that object. I mean, talking about like pieces of cake or something, look at how we react to those things, right? We don't sit there and just like very slowly enjoy the pleasure of it. Maybe you do. I'm not, I'm including myself in this, I watch my own habits around when I have something delicious, delightful to eat. The tendency is that you don't even really stop and enjoy the pleasantness of what's in your mouth because you're constantly thinking about the next forkful that you're going to put in your mouth, right? And you just want to keep having that experience and keep feeding that craving mind, that desirous mind. If you can begin to even just slow things down, you can start watching the process of what's going on in your mind a little bit more. The fact that we are overlaying at that time a pleasantness that goes way beyond what is there. Anyway, talking about cake reminded me of when I would visit my mom in Indianapolis. There's this wonderful shop called the Cake Bake Shop. They actually have one in Disney World in Orlando, Florida. They managed to get a license to have a shop there or whatever. Their cakes are unbelievable from my perspective. Some people might look at them and, you know, get disgusted, but they're these amazing cakes that just are frosted perfectly, and I don't know. Anyway. So again, this is we can see how attachment is this craving mind, this desirous mind. It's constantly thinking about all the wonderful things that we'd like to be experiencing. It can manifest in a variety of ways because we have numerous objects that are pleasant for us that give us that sensation. I'm going to share just a little bit of the way Geshe Sopa talks about this in Steps on the Path to Enlightenment, his commentary on the Lamrim Chenmo, the treatise, the great treatise of Lama Tsongkhapa. He just says, in general, we say that an affliction arises when A, it has not been eliminated from the root. In other words, you do have the seeds of that affliction on your mental continuum. B, the object is nearby, or in, at least in your mind. Like I said, you could be thinking about it. Maybe somebody said, yeah, this dessert's at this new store, and then you haven't even gone to the store. You haven't even seen it yet. Let me take it off screen. I remember when I've told this story before, but when the iPad was introduced many years ago, down in Albuquerque, south of Santa Fe, for those of you who, I think everyone here, yeah, I'm not sure everyone here is from New Mexico, but in Albuquerque, they have an Apple store, right? And there were a news team that was out there like the night before the iPad was going to be released that next morning. And they were talking to all these people who were camping out and lined up. And they asked this one man, they said, "Oh, so you're here to buy an iPad?" And he says, "Oh yeah, I can't wait to get it." And he said, "Well," the reporter said, "Well, do you know what it does?" He says, "No, but I want one." It's like people can even like project a desire on something that they don't even have any idea what the qualities are. I mean, at that point, there was a lot of hush hush around what the iPad really was. It was only little glimpses of things or whatever. But this is what advertising does in our world too, right? That's what Madison Avenue is all about, is essentially getting people riled up, getting their desire going, so that they start projecting all these qualities on things that they feel that they need then, they have to have in their lives. They can't be without the next model of iPhone. I don't know what they're up to, like 17 or 18 or something, iPhones, but I don't know where they're at with iPads. But anyway, the idea is that we can see how this operates in our world, and we can see how it's an unhealthy pattern. It's something where we keep grasping after something as if it's going to do the trick for us, and things never do the final trick for us. The way we can kind of have the trick done for us is by working on our own minds. That's the only thing that's going to bring us to any deeper level of satisfaction. So the second point there, the object is nearby or once more in our minds, and you perceive it erroneously. You're overlaying once more qualities on it, like, oh, this iPad's going to be wonderful, even though you've never even experienced it, right? And the iPad is just a tool. You bring it home and you work with it for a while, and it still is useful, but it doesn't have the luster that it had when you first got it, right? I mean, this is what happens to things. This is our experience. So perceiving the object erroneously is the key. That's why our mental consciousness, our conceptual mind in particular, is the problem. But it's also, of course, the solution. Because if we think about things in a healthier way, and we actually relate to them from a place of wisdom rather than a place of delusion, then we will have a different relationship with these objects. And eventually we'll be able to induce the wisdom that will cut through all of it. So we can remove the seeds. Once you remove the seeds, that first factor, then you don't have to worry about any of the others because nothing else will arise. Of course, you won't have improper thoughts, improper attention, because you'll be seeing things correctly. You'll be imbued with wisdom. So in the meantime, we as, practitioners who are trying to tame our minds without that deeper wisdom to cut through the roots of all of this, to remove all the seeds, we have to work on controlling our thoughts. We have to be aware of the process. I want to point out one thing as we're working with all of this is keep in mind that it's good to even catch it after the fact. If you're, it's just starting to get to work with your mind and everything, you might go, "Oh, I just did it again. I just had this crazy mind of attachment and desire that just went nuts with that piece of cake or that whatever." And that's okay. You at least identified it afterwards, right? Afterwards is better than not seeing it all at all. Most people, most beings in this world do not see their delusion at all. They don't see it as a delusion. You know, I think I mentioned this around Western psychology versus Buddhist psychology. Western psychology thinks there's a healthy level of mind that has some measure of anger and attachment, desire, what have you, all these various things. And their goal is not to completely abolish them. Whereas in Buddhism, the goal is to be rid of all of those because they're the problem. They're the source of all of our misery and discontent and bring us only more suffering. So in our pursuit, we have to start where we are in terms of being aware of what's going on, even if it's after the fact, and then begin to pull it in further and further and to use what are called antidotal minds. Antidotal minds are the minds that will at least at the level of that affliction, they begin by working simply with that affliction. So I mentioned earlier that non-attachment is the antidote to attachment. And non-attachment doesn't mean that you're just going to like shut off all your senses, live in a sensory deprivation tank with nothing you see, hear, taste, touch, smell, whatever. You can't possibly be removed from everything forever. So that's not the answer. It means that, again, we have to work on changing our thoughts, actually doing something to curtail what we are thinking by introducing a thought that is contrary to it, a thought that helps us to lessen that attachment. And there are a number of these. Again, I'll talk about those in just a minute. Let's go back to our slides. I haven't finished off the list of the six, by the way, but let me finish what Geshe Sopa says about these. He says this means that to begin with, the affliction of attachment, for example, is abiding in your continuum as a subtle propensity. Then an attractive object, acting as a suitable condition, comes into proximity. Finally, although that object is impure and it's contaminated, right, and it has a nature of causing suffering, if we follow it with that mind of attachment, it just simply will induce more suffering. You view it in the opposite way, as pure and a cause of pleasure. This is already pointing out where the antidotes to attachment often are, is that to see the impurity of those objects, to see how they cause us suffering, to see the disadvantages of following a mind of attachment. Those often help to curtail this desirous mind. To understand, I put this in here. I actually saw this on Facebook. Somebody posted this just a couple of weeks ago, and I thought this quote from Chagda Toku was really quite nice. It says here, to understand how delusion arises, practice watching your mind. Begin by simply letting it relax, without thinking of the past or the future, without feeling hope or fear about this thing or that. Let it rest comfortably, open and natural. In this space of the mind, there is no problem, no suffering, right? Because if we're actually just with things in a mind where nothing is arising that's going to distort or disturb the mind, that's the peace in a sense that we're seeking. It's not the final peace, but it's a part of the peace. Because the peaceful state of mind we are ideally wanting to cultivate is grounded in a sort of mind of concentration, of abiding in presence and awareness, and then, of course, introducing the wisdom aspect. But anyway, let's see what else Chagda Toku says. He says, then, notice how something will catch your attention. An image, a sound, a smell. Your mind then splits into inner and outer, self and other, subject and object. In simply perceiving the object, there is still no problem. At that point, an object has come into your sphere of awareness, right? Suddenly you hear music from a distance, and maybe that's music that you enjoy, maybe it's music you don't enjoy, and there's no problem yet. But when you zero in on it, he says, you notice that it's big or small, white or black, square or circular, good or bad. Then you make a judgment, whether it's pretty, ugly. Having made that judgment, you react to it. You decide you like it or don't like it. This is all the process that I've been talking about, that the mind goes into in this improper attention. It's delineating, this is good, this is bad, this is what I want, this is what I don't want. This is the mind that is causing us our problems, this overthinking in a sense. I'm not saying any thinking is overthinking, but the thinking that drives us in these directions where we are, once more, differentiating things in a way to where the attachment and anger will arise. As he says there, that's when the problem starts, because I like it leads to I want it. We want to possess what we perceive to be desirable. Similarly, I don't like it leads to I don't want it. And if we like something, want it, and can't have it, we suffer. If we don't want it, but can't keep it away, again, we suffer. Our suffering seems to occur because of the object of our desire or aversion, but that's not really so. It happens because the mind splits into object-subject duality and becomes involved in wanting or not wanting something. And he doesn't point out the exaggeration, but that's part of it, right? Because we're exaggerating the objects into these delicious, delightful things that we want and have to possess versus the unattractive objects that we overlay a negative connotation on, and we don't want those because they're so unpleasant, so awful. Let me finish off these six factors just so you're aware of them. The last three, as I said, don't necessarily arise with every instance of the delusions, but can be there in many of them. The fourth one is habituation. And by the way, in a more traditional presentation, they don't align them up like this. This is my own way of putting these to present them. These six factors, if you go to Lama Tsongkhapa's Lam Rim text, Pavanka Rinpoche, what have you, they will talk about them differently in terms of the order. But the habituation means that we have gotten very habituated and familiar with a particular affliction. And so that affliction tends to arise more easily because we're habituated to it. Now, I can say most of us are habituated to most of the afflictions, right? But there probably are some that we know are things we need to work on, the things that are real problematic for us. Often we talk to people who have a pattern of anger, right? And they just say, "Oh, I'm a very angry person." Well, that's where they've made that so habituated and so familiar that they even think that that's who they are. That's their view of themselves, an angry person. Many times they'll say, "Well, I just can't do anything about it. That's just the way I am. I'm just an angry person." Well, they can do something about it. It's just they are so habituated and familiar with that mind that it arises very easily. Any little slight, any little imperfection, anything that causes them any type of pain or suffering, they immediately get angry and upset. So again, with attachment, it's the opposite. Any little pleasant thing, we're immediately drawn towards it and can't keep our hands off of it and want to possess it and what have you. So again, habituation does play a role. Let's go through the other two quickly. These are more external factors that can influence the thinking of the mind. Number five, the influence of what we call misleading friends or social distraction. Sometimes we are influenced in our behavior by the people we hang out with. That's why, like, remember our parents probably told us as kids, well, be careful who you go hanging out with because you might get in trouble. Well, it's true, right? If you do hang out with the people who are doing things that are maybe not so good to do, well, then you start following them. You start engaging in the same behavior. We are influenced by others. This is why in Buddhism, of course, we have Sangha, we have community. This center in Taos is a community, a sangha for people who are like-minded to get support from each other and to have that commonality of how we want to practice together and what have you. It helps to choose people to be around you who support what you're trying to do and the way that you want to be in the world. If you have misleading friends, people who are going to distract you socially to get involved in stuff, it's only one drink. Let's go down to the bar, and then you end up spending the whole night at the bar, and you come home at 3 in the morning, all drunk and disheveled, and you can't even get up and meditate or do anything. I mean, this does happen. I'm exaggerating a little for some of us, I'm sure. I haven't been in a bar in so long. I don't remember what bars look like, but the idea is that we do have to pay attention to that factor. That can have an influence on us, particularly, again, the people who are very close to us, who might have very different views than what we have. The sixth one is called following false teachings or explanations. But this is kind of a broad category because it also is sort of encompassing the way in which any sort of influences seep into our awareness. And of course, this day and age that we're living in, where we have access to a wide array of things that we can experience in just turning on a device, right? A pad or a phone or a computer, and suddenly, we can access all kinds of information. And sometimes those things come through in terms of just general ways of approaching things that are part of our society. I mean, I've mentioned this before, but I've been pretty dismayed at the quality of films coming out of our Hollywood film machine these days because there's so many films that are about revenge. Revenge is a cultural kind of influence that we sometimes feel ourselves because we go to these films or read books or do whatever, and the whole thing is you have to get back at the people who've wronged you. And in Buddhism, that's not how we roll. That's not how we do things, right? We are trying to maintain a mind of compassion and love towards all beings. And we get an influence in our culture of this mind of revenge, sort of need to retaliate against those who have done something that is harmful to us, motivated by strong resentment and a feeling like you need to restore justice in some way or something. It's again an influence that is in our culture. Look at back in the 60s. I was still pretty young when all of the flower power stuff and all of that was happening, but there was that phrase which I even heard, which was if it feels good, do it. Well, that's not a philosophy of life to live, right? If it feels good, do it. What does that mean? It means like all those wonderful objects of attachment, you just keep doing them because they feel good. And that's what the attachment's essentially all about, just craving after all these things that feel good. So we have to be careful how we bring various ideas through media, through influences that are in our culture, and incorporate them into our way of thinking, because those things can induce a more leniency towards objects of attachment and our continuing to engage in them and what have you. So again, this is something to be aware of. These six are, again, a wonderful teaching to kind of meditate on. And I do have, I think, part of the mindfulness instruction or, meditation to take a look at how they operate. And not, again, all six of them may be there, but the first three will definitely be there. If we're going to get to know our minds, as this course is titled, we need to understand this mechanism by which, with attachment in particular, we are exaggerating pleasantness on the basis of something that comes into our sphere of experience that we have the karma to experience as pleasant. And because we have that seed of attachment, it will arise when we start thinking about things in an improper way. We can change that thinking, though. And that's again what all of this antidotal thinking is all about. Uh, Bringing the mind of non-attachment up. So let's go to non-attachment. I'll go to Venerable Gyatso's text in a moment. Let's look at what the Dalai Lama and Venerable Chodron say in their book, where they go through these mental factors. Non-attachment is not the mere absence of attachment. Because you could have right now, maybe you don't have any attachment in your mind. Nothing is appearing to you that's, contaminated object. You're not eating something delicious, or you're not listening to music or whatever. So it's not the absence of attachment, but the opposite of attachment and the direct antidote to it. Referring to an object in psychic existence, a contaminated object, non-attachment prevents and counteracts attachment and subdues obsession with attractive objects and people. So there is an absence of attachment, but it's because we are creating an antidotal mind, a mind that is seeing things more clearly, that is understanding the nature of what we experience that is pleasant in our lives. And on the basis of that, we are not exaggerating. We're not putting that overlay. We're not thinking about things in this unhealthy way. And therefore, we can experience the pleasure without the grasping, without the craving, all of that. That's the goal. That's what we could say is more fully developed non-attachment, is when we are able to be with those pleasant experiences and have the mind be calm and at peace. Mostly, again, when I think about that cake bake shop back in Indianapolis, as soon as you walk in the door and you see these beautiful cakes and you know that you're going to get this huge slice at the end of your meal or whatever, you're already starting to get disturbed. You're already starting to think like you're out of the moment. You're not mindful. You're not that aware. You're continually projecting on this experience that you're anticipating having. And then you get the piece of cake, and they're delicious cakes, right? Without a doubt, I enjoy them. That's my karma to have that wonderful experience of shoveling that cake in my mouth. But usually they're too big, and I've eaten before, and I end up like getting, okay, that's enough. I've had enough of that. And, so again, we can change our minds to where you can have that experience of the bites of cake and not be disturbed by it, not continually be drawn to it, like, a moth towards a flame. So this is the idea behind this mind of non-attachment. I think I've got another slide from them. Well, let's stop here. Let's go to the text. Let's see what Venerable Gyatso says about non-attachment. This was, I think, around 93, I think, or something. Mm, let's see where it was. There it is, 94. No, yeah, 93. Okay, good. I remembered it. I just didn't, again, forgot that it's not the same number on the PDF file. Non-attachment, he says, is the opposite of attachment. Although self-grasping ignorance is the root of all disturbing emotions, it is attachment to transitory pleasures and objects of pleasure that binds us to the cycle of death and rebirth. Attachment wishes to acquire and keep close objects whose good qualities are exaggerated and whose bad qualities are ignored. This attitude easily leads us into non-virtuous actions, from killing through to idle gossip. Those of you who know the 10 non-virtuous actions, these are the first 7. Those 3 of body that start with killing, and the 4 of speech that end with idle gossip. As we approach death, attachment generates craving and grasping at life, which nurture karmic propensities for rebirth. And this is why some see it as the root of psychic existence, because we are continually craving, and craving causes us to be reborn. He continues, he says, the opposite of attachment is non-attachment, a strongly functioning, positive attitude that, far from being a blank, emotionless state, renders the mind peaceful by seeing through the false projections of ignorance and attachment. The ignorance that thinks that the pleasantness is inherent there in the object and that the object has its own inherent existence. And of course, the attachment that is projecting on top of that even greater pleasantness, as I've been talking about tonight. So, non attachment is something we actually have to cultivate. And that's the end of that presentation. But how do we cultivate it? Again, there are a number of antidotes that we can use, and let's go through those on the screen because these are important for you to begin to utilize if you aren't utilizing them already. First of all, reflect on the simple faults of attachment. This sometimes is enough. With regard to some objects, we might go, yeah, I got to stop buying these things. I got to stop going after the new model of an iPhone or whatever because of these faults. First of all, the object never lasts. It only feeds a dissatisfied mind. This is the craving, the desire that is perpetual, this cycle of always wanting something, right? The uncertainty of the object in fulfilling our immediate desire. I mean, recall your experiences of the past. When you got the previous iPhone model, remember what it was like after iPhone 16 when you got it. Well, did it really fulfill your immediate desire? Was it all it was cracked up to be? And then know that that means you don't necessarily have to go running after, iPhone 17. How other negative minds arise from it, such as jealousy, possessiveness, anger, insecurity, disappointment, etc. We're going to see this when we get to anger. Anger is the mind that essentially is attachment being thwarted and getting what it wants. The pleasant, wonderful experiences that we have as our expectation. That's our default mode, is continually wanting things to be pleasant, delightful, enjoyable. And when we don't get that, when somebody interrupts that, well, then anger usually arises. But certainly jealousy can be there, possessiveness, insecurity, all of these. Think about it. Really, each of these in and of themselves is a fault that we should reflect on and that can feed into our non attachment. It exaggerates the importance of the object. It keeps us in samsara. This is, again, what the Buddha said in that first teaching on the Four Noble Truths is the cause of dukkha, the cause of our state of dissatisfaction is desire, craving. It also distracts us from achieving realizations on the path. I mean, look at how much time, we spend trying to acquire and protect objects of desire that we have. You know, Certainly this is one of the sources of dissatisfaction for many people who are very rich, right? Is that they have all these beautiful homes and then they have to protect them. They have to put in a whole new security system to keep people out, and they have to make sure that it's all managed and taken care of well. And because of their attachment to what they have, they end up consuming their whole life. This is why, again, in Buddhism, there is definitely embracing a simpler life if you can. But keep in mind that even if you have those objects, you don't need to be attached to them either. If you have objects that are in your house, filling your house, beautiful things that you've acquired and what have you, you don't have to be attached to them. When a beautiful vase that you got in, Singapore or something falls off the shelf and breaks, you go, oh, well, I was gonna have to be parted from it anyway, right? And it doesn't really it never really satisfied me. It was nice to have on the shelf, but it didn't do the trick, right? You can see it through that lens and not have the attachment that's going to be bent out of shape when it breaks. I mean, just using these as examples. Again, the idea is we have to start changing our way of perceiving those things to see that they are not leading us to the results we seek. They are actually faulty. They are actually going to cause us to have problems, to keep us ensnared in samsara and to never really do the trick and satisfy us at the deepest level. This is just the nature of those phenomena. So you can do, again, this is here for you to refer to, and I'll mention it later in terms of advice for the next week or so, but you can definitely reflect on all of those. Also, one of the more common antidotes is to examine the undesirable, the unattractive aspects of the object. And the common example, of course, we did talk about attraction to human bodies, the sexual attraction that we might have for somebody who we desire. If a human body is the object of attachment, We can discern its unclean aspects. There's an entire section of Master Shantideva's eighth chapter where he goes into the unclean aspects of a human body. He uses a female body, but it's because he's teaching monks, and most of them are attracted to female bodies, and so it was very effective for them. But any body, regardless of gender, whatever gender that person identifies, it's an unclean body. The stuff comes out through various orifices that is not so pleasant, right? As is explained here, if the attachment is towards food, even think about how unattractive that food is, even after it has been chewed in the mouth for a short time, much less how repulsive it is as it goes through the alimentary canal and eventually exits the body. And Geshe pointed this out once in one of his teachings, Geshe Sharab, how, even if you would like were to take some food and chew it just a little and then put it back on the plate for someone else to eat, nobody would want to eat it, right? It's already gross. It's already kind of something that's undesirable. But that's what happens to the food they eat, right? They take it off the plate and they put it in their mouth, and it's the same process. It all starts looking a little grayer and browner and whatever. It's not as delightful as it was when it was on the plate. And as they swallow it, it starts mixing with the digestive fluids and it goes through the entire process and it comes out the other end looking like something we would again never want to eat. So that's the process. That's what's going on with these bodies, folks. That's what's going on with food. Anything that we look at, we can begin to see some of the unattractive aspects of it and see that it is not something that is pure and pristine and capable of producing what we are desiring, which is a deeper state of well-being and happiness, which once more can be attained when we have non-attachment, when we have an ability to relate to things in our world in a very different way, and eventually to be free of the ignorance that's driving the whole show. So the unattractive aspects are important to focus on. And again, it's not to make you repulsed by everything in the world, though there is a level of kind of dissatisfaction we need to see, as we saw when we went through the Four Noble Truths, right? You need to see that samsara is dukkha, it is unsatisfactory. But you shouldn't get to the point where you're like totally repulsed by everyone around you because all these human bodies are just machines that make feces. That's not the goal is not to like be repulsed by them. The goal is to see their situation clearly and to see that that's also, of course, your situation and to not be blind to that reality and generate even deeper compassion on the basis of that, which we'll talk about much later. But the idea is that these correct views of things are not going to make us incapable of being involved in the world. They should actually open our eyes and our hearts in ways that we can then be much more productive in the world because we see things how they are. We're not going to follow those trails, to dissatisfaction again and again and again. We're going to stop doing that. Right, that old phrase of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Well, that's what we've been doing in samsara since beginningless time. We keep doing the same things over and over again. We get a human existence finally after zillions of existences in the lower realms, and all we can do is go, oh, this is like a kid in a candy shop. We just want to keep grabbing things and enjoying things, and then we die, and what was our life used for? So we have to again begin to see the unattractive aspects of these things. Things are not all they're cracked up to be. And this existence is not satisfactory. Being in this human body, yeah, there's a lot of wonderful things about a human existence. That's part of the teachings in the Lam Rim, right? That we have a basis upon which we can investigate the teachings and, engage in virtue, all these wonderful things. But it's still a human body. It's still dukkha. It's still unsatisfactory. So kind of balancing things out. Right now, with the mind of attachment, we see everything at this peak of having delicious, delightful, wonderful qualities beyond what's there. We want to at least balance it out so that we see, yeah, there's bad qualities too. As was pointed out in that slide earlier, the good and the bad kind of coexist. They're there as part of every object, right? So at least balance it out so that you don't have this distorted exaggeration going on that's happening with attachment. Let's continue on with the slides and move on to the secondary, the close afflictions. Recollect impermanence and death. This is another very powerful antidote. Recall that you will definitely have to separate from that object of attachment sooner or later. Whether it goes out of your life or you are forced to leave it behind at death, you go out of its life. right? We're all going to have to leave a lot of stuff behind, right? I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, have dealt with the leftovers of somebody's existence in this world, whether it was a parent or what have you, where you had to go through all the stuff and everything they accumulated and all of that, which they cannot enjoy now, right? They've gone. And this is something that is reality, right? That's a grosser level of impermanence. Things also are changing moment by moment, that subtler level. But in terms of the mind of attachment, it really helps us to think about the fact that we're going to have to separate from everything. There is that one verse from Master Shantideva where he talks about wanting to encourage us to be giving things, right? He says, since I have to separate from things eventually, it's better to use them well in this life now while I have them. I'm paraphrasing, but essentially, that is the mentality we want to have. And of course, the antidote to generosity or to attachment and miserliness and what have you often is generosity, is our giving away things. I think I mentioned this, well, I mentioned it sometime recently. I don't know if it was with all of you, but one teacher I had in San Francisco here, where I am now at Sichenling, was Ngawan Chotak. And Ngawan Chotak um, used to travel, I guess, with a friend of his in Europe. And this person would talk about all of his possessions in the past tense. So he'd say, "Oh, this was a nice watch that I had. Oh, and this was a nice sweater that I owned, or whatever." He'd talk about everything as if it was out of his life already, so that he could adjust his mind for the reality that at some point it is going to be out of his life, either before he dies or when he dies, right? I think it's maybe you might drive people around you crazy if you constantly talk about things in the past tense, but it's an exercise that is getting at that reality of impermanence. If you think about that every day, look around your room, look around your house, all the things that you have, all the possessions, all of that will be gone, right? People who experience like floods or fires or something like that, where everything they have is gone, where it's all consumed and they don't have anything. It's a powerful lesson, right? It's painful, very difficult, but it's interesting. There was a couple who live in the North Bay. The Jack has passed away, but Judith, his wife, is still alive. But the two of them had a fire in their home. Unfortunately, there were pets in the house that died in the fire, but they're Buddhist practitioners and they had a very different response to that, right? Oh, yeah, sad for the animals that died, but they understand the transitory nature of these possessions. They're not attached to them. So, anyway, I try to use examples when I can of people that have exhibited these antidotes in their own thinking and have had an influence when they do lose things in their lives. Just briefly touch on these. I may not, might spend next week looking at these a little bit more. There are three close afflictions derived from attachment. Remember, I mentioned these three earlier: miserliness or avarice, greed, haughtiness or self-satisfaction, kind of an attachment to our the way we think about ourselves as having all these particular wonderful things. It's the root, the basis for pride. We're going to talk about pride. It's one of the six root afflictions. We'll talk about that probably in March. But anyway, it says there the fourth one, or the third one, excitement. Excitement is when we have a mind that is craving these pleasurable objects, and it often is a problem when it manifests in our meditation. No doubt every one of us have had experiences where we're sitting and trying to meditate calmly, and the mind has been seeking objects of desire. It would be really nice to get up and eat that Haagen-Dazs in the freezer or whatever. Okay, so let's go through these in terms of what's said in a few different texts. This is Geshe Rabtin's text. Avarice or miserliness is a mental factor that, out of attachment to respect and material gain, firmly holds on to one's possessions with no wish to give them away. It has the function of cherishing one's possessions without letting them decrease. And so we know what the greedy mind is like. Again, we all have it to some degree. Things that we aren't willing to let go, that we just think, I'll hold on to that. Thank you. I might need that. That's me. That's for me. That's not for you. Right? And we have that grasping that is really tight. This is actually the mind they say that induces rebirth in the hungry ghost realm, where we won't be able to experience even just the food and the water that we need for sustenance because we've been so miserly around the things that we have. Of course, the main antidote to our miserliness is generosity. Let's take a look there. That was what, 117 or something like that. We put in 116. It's further than that. 117. There it is. Okay. Miserliness, as he says, is a mental attitude of intense clinging to objects, whoops, of attachment, unable to give them away. Our possessions, recognition and respect, our knowledge, unwilling to even share what we know. From the karmic point of view, miserliness is the obstacle to practicing generosity, and it creates the cause for future poverty, both material and spiritual. That is the karmic result of miserliness, is that you don't have resources and you don't have knowledge and you don't have all the things that you were clinging to because that was an obstacle to practicing your generosity of those things. And by giving things away, you create the karma to have them. So again, I don't need to read that next paragraph, but let's look at the types of generosity, and that may be all we have time for tonight. Most of you have heard of the main three. There are four that are presented here. Generosity of giving wise counsel, giving dharma, essentially, we call it. But anytime we help others to have spiritual teachings or some advice that's going to help them and to have more peace in their lives and what have you. Scriptural or experiential advice to help those who are suffering under the influence of their afflictions leads them to ultimate peace or to some ordinary good. This is practiced not only by teaching, but also by studying and meditating with the thought to help others, with the insight you'll gain. So anytime that you turn your mind towards Dharma and you have that thought that you want to be able to benefit others through what you're studying and practicing, that's a powerful generosity. Generosity of giving protection from fear. However we're able, we should do what we can to free prisoners, you know, rescue animals from danger, help people in difficult situations, such as the sick, someone drowning, and those under threat from thieves or wild animals. Hard to do sometimes, but if we have the capability and resources to help those who are in fear, fear of their lives, fear of hunger, fear of whatever, we can do that. Generosity of giving love. This is the one that's often added as the fourth type, but it's third in his presentation. This is the mind that's viewing others with love from our hearts. This is a way of giving a sense of loving kindness to others, whoever we meet. It's a very powerful practice. It helps people to feel at ease and that they're not being threatened by you because you have love for them. And then finally, the common one that we talk about for generosity, giving material aid, our wealth, our possessions, our enjoyments, even our body. All of those can be actually given or simply wishing. The story about Master Shantideva, who I mentioned a short while ago, is that he had no resources. And when he was writing his texts, he would think about offering, giving things that are in kind of the world at large. We can give beautiful mountain views and delightful lights in the sky, the aurora borealis or whatever. You can offer all these kinds of things that are out there that are like common property. And you can think about mentally offering things all the time, right? So you don't need to have those physical things to practice that type of generosity. These patterns, though, certainly when you start working with giving away what you have, even mentally, are very powerful to release that miserliness. Because the miserliness, once more, is grabbing onto things and saying, I'm not going to part from that because I want it for me, right? It's very self-centered. So it blocks, again, a heightened form of attachment that's all about holding on to things and not being willing to part with them, even when you know they will be a benefit to some other. Again, be careful of how we practice generosity because you don't want to engage in giving more than what you're capable of and then regretting it. They use this bodhisattva ideal of even giving away our bodies. That would be material giving. There's that wonderful story of the Buddha when he was a prince and he gave his body to the tigress who was starving so she could feed her cubs who were also starving. We're not ready for that. I'm not ready for that. I'm not going to go wandering around in the mountains looking for some, what do they call them? The cougars or what have you, mountain cats. I don't know. There's another name for them. I'm not thinking of it at the moment. Anyway, I'm not ready for that. Most of us are not ready for that level of giving. But even some of the material giving we are engaged in, if you end up regretting that giving, it's a negative karma in and of itself. So try to first practice mentally giving. Think about giving things away. That's a way to relieve some of this miserliness, and then eventually you can do it through actual giving. So I'm going to skip forward just to give you a brief thing. I'll put these slides together. Um, I'll talk more about miserliness and all these. I think we need to maybe open it up to questions. Mindfulness exercise number one that I'd like you to work with as you come into contact with objects that produce a pleasurable feeling. Notice how the mistaken conception of attachment arises, particularly with regard to those six factors. That again, at least the first three are there, if not all six. And also notice whether just having that awareness of the process of attachment arising can disrupt its development. Sometimes that's enough. If we kind of use a meta awareness, awareness of what's going on in our minds and our awareness, we can often change what's happening because we suddenly are observing it, right? We're no longer just following that pattern. We're going, I'm kind of curious about what's going on with my mind right now. What are the thoughts I'm having towards that delicious piece of cake or whatever? Number two, having meditated on the antidotes to attachment, as you come into contact with objects that produce a pleasurable feeling and you see desire arising, apply any of those we discussed to see how they curtail the progression of attachment. Now, it's good to meditate on these ahead of time so you can bring them to mind. The various faults of attachment. Again, there was a whole list of them on that slide, right? Examining the unattractive features of it, things that are not so delightful and delicious about that. Recollecting impermanence and death, that you have to be separated from that object eventually. Mindfulness exercise number three, we haven't gotten to all of these yet, so maybe you can, let that one go till next week. We'll move that forward to next week. And then this is the reading assignment for next week because we are going to move on to anger. We will work with anger, which again is the second of the three poisons and second of the list of the six root afflictions. And again, there is this other thing that it did get added even last week, these reference materials. This is another folder or another file that you have out on the Google Drive. It's some teachings from Lama Yeshe, and there's a good section, 7, 8 pages, on anger. Might be worth reading that ahead of time just to get your head around that particular delusion. But we'll spend a fair amount of time on anger. There's a lot to talk about in terms of antidotes to anger and ways we can reframe our thinking so that we undermine that affliction. But for now, work on attachment. So, questions or comments from anybody? I don't see anything in the chat box. So, I would just want to give you a little pep talk here. Attachment is a tough one. As was said, this is really one of the hardest ones for us to diminish the power of because this is our default mode. I mean, look at when we get up out of bed and like the initial thoughts of like, I want this, I want that, all of that kind of movement throughout our day is often propelled by just our desire for all these things. Now, again, you have to sustain your body, so you do have to eat food, and you probably want to eat food that is enjoyable to eat. But watch the mind, even from the very first moment of, breakfast all through the day, whatever meals you have, whatever food you partake of, watch what's going on, particularly around food. We have a ton of attachment to food. Lisa, I think I can share this. Venerable Robina and I had lunch a year, well, not quite a year ago, I think it was. Mm, I think maybe it was 2 years ago almost. I can't remember when that lunch was. But I asked her because I was treating her to lunch. I was like, "Would you like some dessert? I'd love to treat you to dessert as well." And she says, "Oh, of course." And then she gets the cake or whatever, and it's in front of her, and she goes, we have all this talk. We talk about attachment and all these things." He says, "But all they got to do is put it in front of me, and suddenly I'm just like totally obsessed with it." And I was like, Venerable Rabina, I'm with you there. We know what the mind of attachment is like. It's just like a magnet. It just draws us in, and it's very hard to maintain some composure, some, distance from that to some degree, and have non-attachment. Because we, as was pointed by Venerable Gyatso, we don't know how to do this yet. There's the pleasurable sensation and there's the mind of attachment, and they just get like that. And so we can't really figure out how to experience the pleasure without that grasping, without that mind that's overlaying all that stuff on top of it. So work with it as best as you can, but be very patient because this is one that probably be working on for quite some time. Okay. So again, just to let you know before we do the dedications in that next week, we will meet again online, and then I have 2 weeks where I'm going to be occupied with teachings and then a retreat at Vajrapani, so I won't have an opportunity to be with you those 2 Thursdays, and perhaps John will let everyone know if possible tonight or whenever that there's something happening on those evenings. And also keep in mind there is that new meditation offering that starts this Sunday with Louis, so do you want to read the dedication list, Jana, or someone there?
No, the
Hello?
audio.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Good. Oh, we want the agenda. We dedicate the merit from this teaching to all sentient beings. We dedicate for the health and long life of all our precious teachers. We dedicate for all those experiencing obstacles, specifically Wyatt, Adrian, Stella, Jana, Marie, Tony, Mary Jo, Rolf, Elohim, Aiden, Ed Gillespie, Yvonne, Alyssa, venerable monks doing the walk for peace, Kennedy, Lisa, and Matt. We dedicate for all those experiencing illness, specifically Jane, Mary Jo, Maria, Libby S, Lou, Bonte P, Kelly, John, Nikki, Cecil, Bill, John, Rolf, the venerable monk who lost his leg, venerable Dom, Fomasan, and Aloka, who's recovering, Lou, Mary, and Roman. We also dedicate for those who have died in the last 49 days or who are dying. Renee Good, Sandra Jackson, Eric, Nate Selby, Alex Pretty, the skunk, Ben, Peppa the dog, Reverend Jesse Jackson, Stony, John B, and Carolyn P. Carlin P.
Okay, thank you, Jana. Were there any other names that need to be added to the list? Okay. All right, so let me go ahead and lead everyone in the prayers. I think that's probably easier again. So put those prayers on the screen. Got to change my file there, but okay. And maybe turn your microphone off in the Gompa just so that we don't have the multiple voices in the prayers. So again, we're going to start with this dedication prayer. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may we quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. Then the prayer for bodhicitta to grow. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow. And may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. And I mentioned this in last night's teaching. It's really nice to think about bodhicitta growing and developing in what I like to call the troublemakers in our world, those who are causing pain and suffering for other beings. There are numerous of them, and we cause our own pain and suffering, but certainly those that are involved at a larger scale, may they find bodhicitta in their hearts and awaken to that compassionate motivation. Then the prayer for His Holiness, and as we recite this, we can think about creating the causes for all of our precious teachers to have good health, long lives, and for their holy wishes to be fulfilled. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And then the verses of the prayer from His Holiness for Lama Zopa Rinpoche's reincarnation, with thoughts that may this reincarnation be found as quickly as possible, and everything be auspicious for that being to be of incredible benefit to all beings. Peerless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losang father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now. Holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable Venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and for mother living beings, you suddenly departed to peace, What a great loss. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. Thank you all for tuning in tonight for the teaching, and I'll look forward to being back with all of you on March 26th. It seems like what's 4 weeks away from today, but in the meantime, yes, I'll be back with you next week as well. So have fun working with attachment. So, all
Thank
right,
you.
everyone. Thank you.
Thank you and
Thank
good
you,
Thank you.
night.
Giovanni.